I'm Bruce Baker, and this is another piece in my History of New Orleans series. And today we're talking with Dr. Justin Nystrom of Loyola University in New Orleans. And we're going to start out talking about Reconstruction and sort of based on his book, New Orleans After the Civil War, which is, I think, one of the very few books, strangely enough, out there that actually talks about the whole of Reconstruction in New Orleans. Perhaps he can correct me if I've missed something sort of obvious there, but that's always surprised me a little bit. It seems like such a natural sort of topic. And I think one of the key themes in your book is about sort of the search for political and social stability across this whole period. Can you say a little bit about why you chose that as one of the themes for the book?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I actually completely rewrote the manuscript, and I know in our emails I didn't mention this, but I completely rewrote the manuscript after the shooting at Virginia Tech, which I was there for, and it was a very difficult time, and so it made me think. Like, it made me view the history a little bit differently. Like, we as historians do put our own experiences into what we write, whether we choose to do so or not. And I thought about how, like, what upheaval really felt like, because I was going through it. And I began to see what the historical actors were going through in a different light. I think it's really easy to underestimate just how difficult and kind of unsettling and anxiety producing all the changes of the 1860s were. I mean, they're so fundamental. I mean, we're living right now in this pandemic through another period of time where it's generating all kinds of different impulses, some of them, you know, not so good, and some of them, you know, pretty amazing. And so I think maybe in 2020, more and more people can relate because we live in an era of great question marks right now. And so one of the things driving our own anxieties is this idea of, well, what is this post-pandemic world going to look like, you know? And I think if we could make an argument that in the late 19th century, you know, after the Civil War, particularly in the South, but not just in the South, really all over the world, is a time of enormous upheaval and, you know, huge technological change, you know, really kind of fundamental shifts in intellectual currents, just the economy, mass migrations. You know, I always tell people when I teach, you know, 19th century America, I mean, like Chicago grows faster than any place known in human history during this time. Like, there's a lot of really unprecedented stuff going on. You know, huge leaps in transportation and things like that. And so for a lot of people, there's a lot of unsettledness in their world generally. And then along comes the Civil War, which, you know, emancipation smashes what is really in many ways in my view, a pre-modern way of organizing a society around chattel slavery. And one of the core arguments I make is that the next 35 years are about finding a way to re-knit that society back together in a way that looked like this pre-modern way, but ultimately in this very modernistic, you know, in all the evil nature of modernism, segregation system of Jim Crow that really the children of the Civil War generation create. So.
And in some ways, I guess, you know, we would think that a city, maybe more than the rural areas, is kind of used to more rapid change and sort of, you know, sudden influxes of immigrant populations and so forth. How does well, I guess one of the other things that you discuss in detail in this really complex sort of topic is the sort of really complex political factionalism in New Orleans. And I know we were talking a little bit just before we started recording about the idea of sort of New Orleans exceptionalism, which is something that, you know, we're covering in a lot of different aspects in this series. And to what extent do you think that the sort of factionalism in New Orleans during Reconstruction, then even carrying on beyond, is that similar to elsewhere? Is it more extreme than elsewhere? Is it, where would you say that sits within the spectrum of experience?
Well, I think another thing that 2020 has shown us is that we're still doing a lot of unpacking of the white supremacist mythology. And so one of the things, of course, that I argue is that the Redeemers, these white conservatives, are actually incredibly divided. But if you watch Birth of a Nation, right, there's this idea of they all kind of get behind. I mean, there are a lot of ahistorical elements to the Birth of a Nation, but the idea that, white folks get together and rally around the idea of white unity and white Southern unity and overthrow the evil carpetbagger and their African-American minions. But the reality is these guys hated each other's guts. I think a lot of these rivalries really bled into the antebellum, Whig Democrat battles even, but they intensify because there's a lot of, again, you think about the anxieties, there's a lot of differing opinions about the better way forward. I mean, the spectrum of the Redeemers goes from people who are kind of like, well, Black people have the right to vote, let's just work with that, all the way to like the really hardcore, the bourbon Democrats, as we would, the sort of classic, and this is true in every state. And I think I was really inspired by Jane Daly's Before Jim Crow in her study of Virginia. Now it's like, I think the book is like almost 30 years old now, but it's really quite good. And of course, obviously Jane Daly, an amazing historian. And she looks at Virginia and does a lot to trace the roots of what goes on with not the readjusters, but the readjusters in Virginia. And, I thought about, well, gosh, maybe that's true. And what I say about unpacking this white supremacist mythology is that I really think it's in many ways, after disfranchisement constitutions of the early 20th century, late 19th and early 20th century, that during this lost cause celebration, this is when Birth of a Nation comes out, based on the Klansman when it's written in 1905, and of course the movie comes out in 1914. And again, that's very powerful. That movie is very, very powerful in shaping consciousness about how Americans and really the world think about Reconstruction. And so we have this mythology that the Redeemers were buddies, and they were united in this inherent truth of white supremacy. And I think the literature of Reconstruction, even though it's in many ways one of the oldest historiographies in American history, that it has taken so much time to unpack it. I mean, because the revisionists were always did all this heavy lifting of, well, maybe the Republicans weren't so bad, I mean, there was a lot to overcome. We see now the magnitude of their task was quite large. And so there wasn't really like a consideration. We just sort of made the Redeemers bad guys, and we didn't really think about, what was going on inside their ranks. And one thing I discovered is there's actually quite a lot of shifting terrain amongst white conservatives about the way forward. And I think it's hard to sometimes take people that you don't necessarily, they're not necessarily your historical heroes on their own terms and say, well, gosh, there's more going on here. And I do think this is definitely, we read C. Van Woodward. I mean, Woodward is like, the Bible, it's like one of the most enduring works of Southern history out there. And, he tells us about all this in Origins, but like, he picks up after 1877. And these things just didn't hatch out of nowhere. They're actually the legacies of Reconstruction.
So in, specifically New Orleans context, where would you see a couple of the sort of key moments where you start to see these divisions emerging during Reconstruction of the people that we think of as Redeemers, who by the early 20th century were sort of lumping them all in together as white supremacist Redeemers, but actually there were some divisions between them. What did they start dividing over during Reconstruction?
Well, the divisions in every state are a little bit different, particularly after Reconstruction. But in New Orleans, Henry Clay Warmoth, of course, is this, really charismatic figure who's a Republican, but he's extremely conservative, and he is this sort of middle way, the liberal Republican movement of the 1870s and so forth, kind of one of the more ironically named political movements. But the idea that you were going to not necessarily accept black social equality. So you weren't going to, I mean, again, you got to realize that social equality is kind of fictive in a lot of ways, because, I mean, there's very little integration going on where white women are present. And there's all kinds of integration going on, but you know, it's siloed, and a lot of it has to do with economics. But there was this idea that, you know, the black political franchise was kind of here to stay, and that, you know, so you had people kind of, we call them moderates, if you will, who were also very not, I mean, they had Whig antecedents. They weren't necessarily super cradle Democrats anyway. And they really thought the Democratic Party had gotten this section into the war. I mean, accurately so, I think. I mean, definitely the fire eater side of the Democratic Party was responsible. And they saw how destructive it was. And they kind of acknowledged defeat, and that there was going to be this new order, and there was going to be a Republican Party, and they were going to take part in shaping what that looked like. And then, you know, like on the other side, you have the hell no, you know, the hell no Democrats, you know, where they're, you know, people like Fred Ogden, who lead the White League, who's this kind of really devoted, found himself as a soldier during the Civil War, something he was good at, had a really kind of, like, in a lot of ways, not one of history's great, you know, obviously liberal heroes, but in a lot of ways, somebody who you understood because there was a certain way he looked at things and he didn't compromise on them. And so, and I mean, there were people much to the right of him, because Fred Ogden kind of believed in the law, and there were a lot of people who didn't necessarily believe in the law either. So, you know, that through violence you could overthrow. And I mean, so I think there's a lot of disbelief that violence will actually prevail early on. Ultimately, we know that does work. But even in the violence, there are a lot of people who, I mean, I think these factions were also personal. One of the things I argue is you know, historians tend not to look, unless they write biography, how important personal relationships are in shaping one's politics or ideology. You know, like, you know, if you're a Marxian historian, you know, like, oh, everything's ideology, and then everything else kind of secondary. I tend to lean towards the biographical, and so, you know, I'm finding people, well, gosh, that person's their next door neighbor. Well, no wonder why they think that way, you know, because they're friends with people who think that way. Mm-hmm. And so I think personal associations are something that separate us from the sociologists. So, you know.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good thing, and it probably makes our history that we write a bit more readable than it might otherwise be.
Yeah, God willing. Yeah.
So aside from Ogden, who are some of maybe the sort of big people in the sort of changing business world of New Orleans after the war? So I'm thinking who sort of play into the political structures and so forth. Are the ways in which trade and commerce are changing as a result of the war playing into the way that politics is structured and the individuals involved?
Well, definitely, trade had always influenced the politics of New Orleans, because New Orleans is a port. And unlike the rest of most of the region, New Orleans has ties with the outside world and sort of economic ties with the North, but also ideological ties with the national interest in infrastructure and tariffs and everything. You know, the concerns of a planter are a little bit different than a concern of the port. And of course, you know, the port at the war has got a huge impact on what goes on at the port. I mean, obviously there's some damage, and it's not till the Eads jetties of the 1870s, of course, which famously, you know, contribute to the flood of 1927, but the deepening of the port, but also the emergence of, you know, the screw-driven steel steamer is revolutionary. And so, you know, New Orleans wasn't the easiest port in the world to reach, because you had to get up the river, you know, and you know, just taking, if your students know anything about sailing, I mean, like sailing around the Florida current and everything like that is not like the world's most straightforward thing. There's a reason why there's a lot of commerce with Latin America. In Creole Italian, my newer book, you know, I talk about Sicily lemons, which have been imported to New Orleans since the 1830s. But it took like 110 days to sail from Palermo to New Orleans. That's a long ass time to be on a boat. So you couldn't bring people, but with steam, it took 29 days, pretty much on the nose. And all of a sudden that meant you could bring immigrants to New Orleans from Sicily directly. And so, there are a lot of, the port is continuing to drive commerce in the city. And so you have a class of business people who are more worldly. And they aren't as chained to, I mean, yes, they're in agriculture, but they don't necessarily care how the commodities get to them. If I mean, they start importing the Italians come in large numbers at first because they're being used in the cane fields. They don't stay there real long. They realize what a raw deal. I mean, it was bad in Sicily, but like, cutting cane, come on. Those experiments, and definitely they have a vested interest in the racial order as a way of maintaining labor, but these are modern people, right? These are forward-facing people who are every day affected by these really rapid transformations that are occurring in technology.
That kind of ties in, maybe a sort of good way to wrap up this segment would be that ties into what you were saying in that email as we were discussing this back and forth about sort of comparing New Orleans to New York and the
Right.
idea that, really these are both, very particular places, but, we don't hesitate to think that the history of New York is relevant to everything and part of modern life and the transition to
The Big
modernity.
Apple, it's America, right? In some
Yeah.
ways, there's no more exceptional place than New York if you've been. Um, so when I was on the job market a long time ago, I had an interview with somebody who just recently passed away, and he kind of goes, "Oh, it was at some third-rate university. I'm glad I didn't get the job there." So anyway, he goes, "Well, how can you argue that New Orleans is relevant to anywhere else?" And I was like, and I shot back with the New York thing, and he was not impressed. But I knew I wasn't getting the job at that point anyway, so I had nothing to lose. And so New Orleans is, I mean, it's the sixth largest city in the country in 1860. It's the only significant port in the South, unless you count Baltimore, which, you could say it's southern, but it's really mid-Atlantic. And economically, it's mid-Atlantic. It's tied to different currents. So New Orleans is, in many ways like a northern city. One of the reasons when I first started coming here, and I was like, I'd spent a long time living in the American South, but my parents are Chicagoans, and I got here and I was like, there's something really northern and almost Midwestern about New Orleans. And it had to do with this ethnic background. But New Orleans is, right, and I know you talked to Anthony Stenonis, who's had a lot to do writing about tourism and like this imagery of New Orleans. And New Orleans is constantly selling itself as an idea to tourists, but I think historians have bought into that a lot. If you look at the bookshelf on New Orleans, we have a lot of books about the 19th century. We have a lot of books about free people of color because they're very interesting, and we tend to think of them as being exceptional. But, like Virginia has a lot of free people of color, but the difference is that they're rural. They are significant in their communities. They're destabilizing in their rural communities in the same way that they're destabilizing in New Orleans. It's just that we have a critical mass of them in New Orleans. And then, there's a New Orleans Orientalism, that where we, particularly with free people of color, where we exoticize. And so in a lot of ways, historians have kind of bought it. It's strange buy into the marketing of New Orleans. And it had to do with this. So in the introduction to my second book, Creole Italian, I take issue with this idea of the antebellum period as a golden age, because we still kind of market it as this golden age, and that's a slaveholder's paradigm. And we still market on the slaveholder's paradigm. It wasn't a golden age for enslaved people. It wasn't a golden age for Irish immigrants in New Orleans. It kind of sucked, and And one of the things I argue, if there's like a golden age of commerce in New Orleans, even like you could say, oh, well, but it grew so much in the antebellum period. But like, look at the numbers for a minute, because we're so obsessed with New Orleans as being this thing that rooted in the antebellum experience, this French Creole. But like, the two most culturally significant things to happen to New Orleans since the Civil War are the massive migration of non-Creole, non-Catholic, Protestant African Americans from the rural South who come to New Orleans. These are the people of Louis Armstrong, right? Louis Armstrong he's a mid-city kid who, like a Central City kid who converted to Catholicism, right? But I don't think was ever terribly religious when it comes right down to it. But there's not a single book about African-American Protestants, the people whose descendants go to Second Street Baptist Church today. We don't think of that as New Orleans because they become Creolized. I mean, the whole the cultural imperialism of Creole is incredibly strong. And so people come here and they're like, oh, all these French names and so forth. But like the other big migration is Sicilian. And that's what I was writing about, and nobody really written anything about it in any kind of like, I want to say meaningful way. There are some, little article studies that are quite good. But nobody took like a stem to stern approach to the Sicilian migration. There's still a really, Laura Kelly's book on the Irish turned out to be kind of something different than she had anticipated for a variety of reasons. So we're still really waiting for a really great nose to tail examination of the Irish migration to New Orleans, which has a lot of parallels with Boston and New York. Mm-hmm. And so like where New Orleans is exceptional is it's a city. I mean, it's urban in a predominant in a region that's rural. I mean, Pierce Lewis in 1970, whatever that book came out, was it 76 or 74, something like that. I mean, he really hit the nail on the head, and I actually cite him in the introduction to Creole Italian, and he's like, we spent too much time looking at moonlight and magnolias and gumbo, and not enough at economy and demography and like some of these really hard statistical analyses of New Orleans that position it within the family of great American cities.
And then we sort of see it as, a city in America and not just a city in Louisiana or a city in the South.
Right.
Reconstruction is a pivotal, I mean, I suppose all periods are pivotal, but certainly as you were saying, the end of slavery and the sort of end of this antebellum period that later gets figured as this golden age is a really pivotal point in that. And I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to talk about Reconstruction in New Orleans with us today. To be honest, I think we need about 15 more books about Reconstruction in New Orleans because there's so many things going on there that it's difficult to scratch the surface of it.